Hello, sorry I'm late.
No problems. Oh, hello. I guess my audio is working now. Yeah.
Yeah, good. I can hear you. Oh, it's been such an infernally busy day here. Oh,
Yeah. Here too.
Fabienne is here. Excellent.
Hello.
How is everybody? Good. Good. Hang on, I have to reply to a message. Yeah, there is, so Fabienne, the logic we have about making the link in the time code in the transcript be for 5 seconds earlier is of course a bit of a challenge, because if it was from, let's say, 5 minutes, then then minus 5 would go decimal unless you have logic for 60, right? Have you solved that?
Yes, I think. I did not try everything. That's why I'm a prototypist. I give the big idea, and then if it breaks, that's another issue. But yeah, I did a little bit. Let's say, for example, if you had 5:55 and you add 6, then it's not 5:61 minutes. So I did a little bit, but yeah, it's not necessarily foolproof. There are libraries for this, and it's true that not the regular expression you use, but the pattern can only go so for the search and replace, let's say. At some point, you need a bit of the math behind it and some edge cases. But yeah, I mean, honestly, it's also why I like prototyping is we don't need to solve every single crazy situation. If it's useful 90% of the time, I think that's already pretty good.
I noticed one quick thing. I noticed that because I saw it being used, so people were putting a sort of time code on their comments. Of course, one of the things I realized is everybody's time code starts from when they join the call, not from the beginning of the call. So that, in the top right-hand corner, mine says 9:21 at the moment because I was sitting in someone before.
That's been solved. Fabian and I have gone much further on this, back and forth, and I talked to my developer who does Liquid. So the thing is, when you paste a number into the YouTube chat, the comments on the YouTube, if it has the basic parsing of hour, colon, minute, colon, seconds, it will automatically make it an in-video link.
Right, yeah.
So when I record here in Zoom, it will give me the time of day, right? So for instance, now, if we do something, it'll be, for me, 16:05.
Sure.
So the interesting bits are as follows. Number one, it will remove 16 completely, make it 00. And that means the time code will only say 5 minutes in. So then it'll be correct for the video, because it doesn't care what time of day, it cares what minute after the hour.
I think we're talking about different things. What I noticed was last time Brando was I was trying to figure out what the numbers were, and then I realized he's putting the time code off the elapsed time on the call at the beginning of his comment. But his elapsed time code call was later than my current time because he'd started at a different time. So we're not all seeing the elapsed times when we join the call. So
we are talking about the same thing. I just haven't explained to you yet why it turns out that actually doesn't matter. And why it doesn't matter is quite interesting. I'm going to find an example.
It doesn't matter to me. I'll put it that way. The whole conversation doesn't matter.
No, hang on, Bob. It does matter. This is actually much more valuable than just us doing a little dicking around. It can be quite useful for our whole project. Now, please click on that link.
Done.
And then when you see the comments in YouTube, just click so you see lots of stuff, right? So the reason it doesn't matter is no longer are we going to suggest you put a time code when you say something. Instead, as I just did myself, I put 2 exclamation marks.
Oh, okay, got it. Okay, yeah. I see where you're going with this. That's fine. I won't make Bob sit through more any explanation. So I get it. Yeah, sorry.
No,
I'm back on track now.
I think it's valuable for Bob and also for Peter. So that is the little script that we are developing takes the time away from the hour, as you see in here. So it's just 00 for the first one. Whenever hour switches to the next hour, it makes it hour 1 and so on. Plus, it strips away everything that doesn't have exclamation mark, so that all we need to do is either exclamation mark, and a keyword or a note, or just leave it, because it still becomes a clickable link. That is a really, really simple, low brain use way of annotating the video. So it's kind of cool. That's it. So what would everyone like to talk about today?
Good morning. Sorry I don't have a live video today. I'm having brunch with Mum to cheer her up a little bit.
I'm sure she's cheered up by watching you be online with your friends.
She just smiled.
Oh, very good. Very, very good.
Well, did you make any progress on the scenario?
I did, and here, let me just find it, because I'm going to send it to you now, because one thing that I think is quite interesting is how so I'm going to say, put a date on it. Yeah, I've been going back and forth a little bit with Mark and also Chris Gutteridge to look at how we can deal with the image maps, because image maps, of course, are an important part of digital murals. So what we have, okay, I'm just giving you a link to the actual document, but now this may sound like a detail. I really don't think it is. I'm going to give you another link. 1 second. I would really appreciate it if you can look at this together. Just clicking through pages and pages. Boom. Yeah, if you could all please click on the second link. I hope we will find it useful.
Okay. It comes up for me, image map. Well, it's a lot of code.
Well, kind of code. And the thing that's so relevant is, first of all, there's something major missing. We haven't finalized how to indicate where on the PDF page this image map is. There are several ways of doing that. We're looking at the easiest, but the whole key to this, the top stuff is just relative. Well, I mean, we're trying. Map location is pixels and axis, blah, blah, blah. It's a little verbose, but the whole point of visual meta, of course, is that someone in 1,000 years should be able to see this and it's obvious. It should be as clear as possible. But the real point I wanted to show you is where it says HTML equals and all of that stuff. That is normal HTML code that's been generated by any software that can generate an image map. So we just paste it straight in. We don't do anything at all. So any software that can then parse an image map already has what it needs. This is 100% web standard. Yeah, Mark?
I'm just checking. So is the HTML5 image map now resolution independent? In other words, it's working more like SVG, because it used to be linked to the web page. And one of the reasons I hadn't actually, I've been silent on the stuff I've been doing is I'm going down the wormhole trying to work out, because realistically, for what the kind of things we're looking at, the bog standard image map isn't necessarily what we want. And it's interesting, people were talking about this in 1994 at least. So the problem was being considered and has not been answered for a while, because the main problem we have is that when we take a file and we put it into the virtual world, that what the the agents that, the programs that people are building that we're going to use in the virtual environment need to know that this area, independent of the resolution, you bring it in at, represents effectively not necessarily a link, but a target. In other words, if you interact within this area, or perhaps even if you look at that area, there is information that you may want to work and transform with. And that's one of the reasons I've sort of been looking at this and trying to work out, probably SVG makes a lot more sense than the HTML image map. It's web compliant, so that's fine with the direction we're moving, which is why I wouldn't worry too much about the visual meta. The visual meta is just going to have a wrapper. So I wouldn't worry what goes inside the wrapper, because we've already discussed when we discussed visual meta that we're going to allow standards driven stuff that which can be dereferenced by software that looks at it. So the software can understand what's in there, or the records of will be around to be able to do that. But it's sort of the sense of we're actually looking at something a little bit more sophisticated than an image map. So, most examples for image maps are sort of rinky-dink little navigation things. Take something the size of Bob's mural, the big one, it gets a lot more complex. And the question is, and it's not just the textual bits, it's actually what is the semantic meaning of this part if we want to do cool traversals. I think SVG of the standards now, and I'm happy to be corrected by others with more technical knowledge than myself here, looks like being the way. The question sort of becomes, if there's additional information beyond the sort of saying that this square has meaning, does it literally just link to something else outside that? Does it how is that done? Because without all these building blocks, we don't get very far. We just stumble another small bit forward. So I'm busy looking at that, and also trying to do it in a way that builds on current and existing standards. But I'm not I remain unconvinced at the moment that the HTML image map as it exists is the ideal way forward.
Right. So
can I understand? Since I think. I'm not a HTML programmer or anything, so I'm inferring from this conversation what an image map is. What I'm inferring is that it's any area of a PDF that you choose to bound with some boundaries. Is that right? And then you start
essentially
naming it.
Yes. The genesis goes back to about 93, and the idea was people were saying, well, look, I've got a picture, but what I really want to do is say, if you click in this part of the picture, it has a different meaning to clicking somewhere else, or indeed clicking anywhere at all. It may have no meaning. And it rather got hijacked into early forms of doing navigation and making, clever navigation in the early days of the web. And that rabbit hole disappeared because it was taken over by CSS and Flash and all sorts of things. The concept of the image map has stayed around, and in that form that I've just described still exists in the HTML standard. In the meantime, SVG seems to be, and again, I'm happy to be corrected by Fabian or Brando, probably know more about this than me in the technical detail, but SVG does the same thing, but it's as you'll understand, the difference between Photoshop necessarily, the bitmap graphics versus the scalable vector graphics. So SVG would allow you to do an image map that's sort of device resolution independent. It just says, within the boundaries of this thing, draw a circle this big in this location. And at that point, that's just two different technologies doing the same thing. What's interesting about what we're proposing is the additional information that we apply to this. So having said, yes, the circle in this position on this PDF has meaning.
And
what do we want to do, and how, and what we want to do rather than dictates how we connect it in terms of working within existing standards.
It will be. I'll have a couple of things. I'll repeat my offer to you, Mark. If you need other like SV, I think I can produce SVG for the murals from Illustrator. So you can have that if you want it.
Well, thanks. The reason I haven't put you to that task.
Well, no, you don't need to explain. I'm just reading my offer.
Yeah, sure.
Thank you. And the second thing is that to have a semantic underlying semantic set of relationships is possible. It's possible in the murals that I've sent you, at least partially, because part of the time they're very structural, and I can describe them to you if you wish, or you can describe them and I can correct them or whatever, whichever you like. And partially they have depended upon the ability of human beings to walk up and look at the mural and supply the semantics of connections and relationships and so forth. So I'd be very eager to discuss those different ones with when you want. When you're ready.
I see he's got his hand up, but one quick.
Sorry.
You're absolutely right, and I think that the challenge comes in that it's mapping the semantic meaning, because I think the thing we want to do in VR is in a sense to look at, interact with the image and say, what is this thing? Image maps were basically designed to do, if you click this part of the image, you follow a link somewhere else. And that's similar, but not exactly the same as we're doing, which is why I'm not rushing to sort of assume that we just apply an existing standard verbatim, because I think it's a lot more subtle than that. And also, there are things that are although we started looking at text, there are things that are non-textual that have semantic meaning, and they may overlap. And so the more I look into this, like all these things, that shows we're on the right path, and it all transpires to be a bit more complex than I first thought. But I take that as a good sign. It takes a bit longer, but if it had been really easy, I'd be worrying I hadn't really looked at the problem properly. Peter.
I'm trying to talk with my mic still muted. Classic experience there. Last time I had mentioned the picture language from structured interpretation of computer programs. Here's another link discussing that. As an alternative to providing pixel coordinates for our objects, which is difficult for an ordinary end user, you could use the language of beside, above, and other descriptive terms of how elements are positioned relative to one another, and allow the system to automatically compute what the coordinates are, so that the user could just say map above text and have the text for the page, and it could work out that the map is going to be half of that. Related to that, I also previously posted a link to CGP Gray's video on metric paper, and the advantage it has in that when it's folded in operations like above or beside, it keeps the same aspect ratio, although it might be flipped 90 degrees with a fold. So if we specified base dimensions to be metric to maintain the same aspect ratio, then you could have a language describing the relative position of items to compose layouts in nice, simple, natural language terms, and avoid having to think about pixel coordinates on screen, which are going to be different anyhow, depending upon whether you're on a handheld phone or a big giant desktop monitor. And just basically try to come up with a specification that purges the notion of absolute coordinates. Okay, that's it.
Yeah, so the reason in the example that I linked to here is HTML is quite simply that if we use SVG, SVG is great in a image map on its own, of course, but once it's embedded in PDF, I don't think we have access to any of that data. And also, what?
Yeah, no, that's the point I was looking at, is that I'm very conscious that we're also covering two things here. We're covering things that we may be making now or in the future, and a large stock of legacy stuff, which we may or may not be able to, shim stuff into or interact with.
Right.
So that also just makes it a little more complex than it appears on the surface.
Yeah, so the reason that I just did, yeah, exactly, Fabian. So the reason I hope you've all had a chance to look at this page is that there's a little bit of our style visual meta at the top, which of course we can make easier and all of that. That's about where the image map is. But below that, all it is, if anybody can use any image map software, even export from Illustrator, HTML would be generated automatically. They just paste it in. But that's the main benefit of just doing it this way. But I do believe that if you're doing it in, let's say, Illustrator, you can export it in several different ways, probably as an image or as a pixel bitmap image or as an SVG. That should be fine. But we do need a better way of saying where on the page the image map is, because what we've seen with the image map example that you guys did is just so powerful. And I think that if you can embed an entire mural into one page of a document, obviously in super high resolution, and then have the means to pull that out when you're in VR, it'll just be such an incredible demonstration of what VR can do, because it's so clear, simple, and big. Oh, one more thing. In terms of the semantic meaning, in HTML, of course, we have the alt image tag. And the alt image tag, I think, could put a lot of that goody stuff in there. You could probably have different alts as well, and that won't kill the HTML. But for environments where that's useful, it could be done. Yeah, another thing. So I've written a further scenario. I've linked it, but I think some of you came in a little after. I'm going to put it in again. And this scenario is all fun and games and everything, but I do think we should have something to let people step into, like we talked about last time. This scenario now is a little bit about the headset as being, if people are supposed to understand this, they have to ignore the headset. In a few years, it'll be so light and easy anyway, right? And then it's the whole idea of what it's like in the space, working with other people and brainstorming, working alone. And then there's a bit of social stuff. But on the section on page 15 of text and VR, it would be really good to hear what people here in the community have to say or add, so that we can put that in there. But if any of it could be viewable here, it would be so amazing.
Yeah, web page is pretty. You mean this document visible in VR? Or
I mean, when someone is reading this document and they click a button, it's a link to a VR experience for that point.
Right. Yeah.
I'm also going to try at the end to put in a few screenshots and links to what we have already built. I think that would be useful. We have, after all, put in effort, both built for the community and built individually, that we would want to include, obviously.
Did you put it in the chat again?
Yeah, I did. Yeah, it's the Dropbox link.
I don't see it.
I'll email it, Bob.
Okay,
Thank you.
thank you.
Actually, I'll just email the document. Is that what you're thinking about? It's only 272K. I'll just send it to Bob right now.
Thank you.
Sent.
I don't know why it hasn't come up in my chat, but I'll look for it in email.
Yeah, good. It's been really interesting doing the thinking for this, because in this little social story that I wrote, this person leaves the meeting room, goes out for a walk with nothing, and gets a call from a friend on their watch. They decide to take the call on their headset. They put on the headset. But what happens if you're in a public space and you're wearing a headset? Already we have intrusion detection, on Oculus. If a dog walks in front of you, you see the outline of the dog in the VR space, which is very useful. But if this is going to go mainstream, it has to also analyze everybody around you to see if anybody is coming towards you in a threatening manner. Right? That has to happen, doesn't it? There's so many things that'll have to be solved.
It's a bit like, the safe way to have driverless cars is to have only driverless cars, because then you've a far less complex problem. No human in the loop. But yes, yeah, I think these do have to be detected. Of course, if you have a mixed reality, it's a bit safer because you should at least be having some attention towards what's going on in the broader picture.
Yeah, no, exactly. And you should be able to dial that. I think that's what, gosh, I feel so embarrassed. I still don't say his name right. Is it Uli Burke? Soft space.
Well, Elio.
Iliad. You know, he has the background, but as I've written about in here, it's kind of an interesting space between VR and AR because the background does appear, but it's irrelevant. So it's not about highlighting things in the space. It's just there. It might as well, it could be anything. But so that comes into that as well.
I just dropped a couple of links related to layout engines for Java applications. And I'm wondering whether that can be generalized to 3D spaces. So that you could automatically place things in a 3D space according to a programmatic thing, maybe, line the walls, stack vertically, stack sideways, but basically to position a three-dimensional objects according to an automatic scheme so that the user could be thinking in terms of some abstract name tableau as opposed to thinking in terms of what coordinates am I going to be putting things at. Well, I really don't want anyone other than programmers to have to think in terms of floating point values representing locations in 3D space. Much better to talk in terms of relations between objects within the three-dimensional space and let those constraints allow the system to work out what the actual coordinates of vertices are going to be.
Yeah, well, so CSS is the sort of current constraint-based layout scheme de rigueur. Swift UI as well, but yeah, in terms of CSS, it should be possible to declare well, I mean, obviously it is not in any current form of CSS, but it's something that I started thinking about a few years ago. It's like, if you started to have a volume of some kind, how are the ways that you could sort of define the relations for it? And in practice, if you've ever seen people create things that are parametric 3D, there's a game called Townscaper, or it's not even a game, it's so that you can build a town. And it's gorgeous, and it succeeds by virtue of having not static sort of blocks of towns, but adaptive, the ability to adaptively compose a town from individual objects. Is that your that's your office room? Brilliant. And
Relatively easy to do badly.
Yes, but yeah, it can be improved as well with more sustained scanning and more experience with it. And like I said, I believe that object capture, if you've tried that on Mac, is excellent, but you'll need to supply it more images. But yeah, so Unity 3D, the gaming engine that is in some level of turmoil at the moment, has a team working on augmented reality, and one of the things that they seek to do and maybe have done is to define games that are supposed to be for augmented reality, saying like, you need to be able to declare that you need to have a certain primary surface, and I need to have these attributes of having an angle no more than 5 degrees off horizontal, and needs to have a cross-sectional area of no less than 1 meter squared, and that so that those are sort of constraints that, like you say, Peter, will be necessary for programmers to be able to identify. But I think that there's just an imagination gap, as with much of this at this point, where as people discover the need to have primitives of kinds like that, to say, I want to have a horizontal surface and I want to deal with this in relation to that horizontal surface, then all of the sort of our favorite declarative markup schemes and languages will follow and develop the expressiveness to be able to kind of capture these spatial relationships. I've had a crack at expanding CSS to do that a few years ago, and I didn't implement any, but I feel like it was an interesting start.
Is it worth talking a bit further about what we may want to try to just put together as a rough demo for Future of Text, which is coming up very soon? Sorry.
I haven't grasped what you're asking for from me yet. So if you'd like me to look at something like that, then that would probably make sense.
Yeah, if you wanted to read this document, not necessarily the whole thing, but the scenario, working in VR is scenario, and see if there's anything in there that you say, oh, well, this we can do.
Okay, I'll do that.
Fabian, goes for you too. I think that would just be so cool. In practical terms, on the 26th, Vint and Sigrid are going to see our neighbor's house because it's a very old special house. So we will see them a little bit during the day. But on the 27th, we're hosting them for dinner. So I will stick a headset on Vint at least that day. So, you know, he will be one of the very critical people who will be entering this. And if we have something specifically text working, all we need is a bit of an aha moment.
Mhm.
You know, and I honestly think that if we can take a PDF into VR and, oh yes, that's very nice, look at the pages everywhere, and then we do the magic of this page is actually a mural, it looks a bit small, Vint, click here, and it opens up room size, the rest of it's gone, and oh my God, you can move it around exactly like we already have. That, I think that would be really mind-blowing. I see some slight vertical head movement in the group. So
yeah, well, yeah. Would you like it's hard to read the scenario as at the same time that one is listening and talking. So I've put that aside.
I mean, I'll give you a really brief walkthrough because it's really not that important to read. So it's basically, it starts by talking about, imagine the device itself is not more obtrusive than normal glasses or sunglasses, super high resolution. And when you sit together with your group that you're working with, you happen to be in an old library and you can work with what seems like a laptop in front of you. But this laptop, you can make the screen really tall if you want. You can make it any size. You can make the screen go away. It doesn't matter. So trying to do the really basic steps first. And then you can there's also a discussion of how you would appear. In some cases, people need to be fully high definition present. And in some cases, like Peter right now, because he can't be in the meeting entirely, you want to have a more frozen avatar. So that'll be interesting how that'll be dealt with. And then we go into what we talked about a little bit last time. Somehow on your laptop type thing, you write a note about the issue at hand. You perform an action, it goes up on a shared wall. Then you have all kinds of great interactions we can have there, chunking things, moving it. And as we talked about last week as well, you can choose to, Monday, you can choose what to see. Maybe you see the name of the person on there. Maybe you see a keyword. Someone may throw a 3D object on there as well, depending on what you're working on. And this is a point that I make in the text in VR section. That is, text is better for a category than an image. An image of a bird is great to show that bird. But to have an image of a bird to show the concept of all birds isn't as good because that bird will have to be a specific bird and therefore it'll be a little bit too focused. So that's an example of text versus image, but you should be able to put everything in there. And then while you're in this meeting, you should be able to go up to the wall or sit at your desk. More information about these notes, which are of course quite magic. And then, oh yeah, sorry, one of the really key points is for the knowledge object you make, even today, you can of course put a Excel spreadsheet thing into Word, a little bit of it. But when you export it, it kind of dies. So what we're talking about here is retaining all of that stuff. So when you're going through other people's work, you can pull things out and you can interact with it. You know, so if you have, and of course, this goes to our whole notion of the importance of metadata. Right, everything can have metadata behind it. So you have knowledge objects rather than just plain text. And the mural is just, and I'm saying just in a good way, another example of what appears to be flat. But when you take it into this kind of a space, you can do further things with it. And on and on and on. A part of it is someone having a meeting with a friend. And then finally, for the text section,
I think it's important to emphasize each time that you add something that's that will be different and not possible in the 2D world, to somehow emphasize that in the scenario. Tag it, flag it, maybe put a little, you know, some kind of an icon or something that says, this is going to be different. This is going to be really different here, so that one can distinguish it from the description of things that we ordinarily do in 2D, in our 2D computers.
yeah, I mean, the structure of the scenario, the way it's written, is it is all about what can only be done in VR, except for a few times when it's highlighted that this will now also benefit you in 2D. So, you know, that kind of highlight is a good idea, but maybe the other way around.
In a similar vein,
I would just from my reader standpoint, it might be good to say in the first sentence, while I'm not trying to describe what happens in 2D world, so you can imagine being able to bring anything in from 2D world into virtual reality, and from now on I want to describe only what's different here.
Right, okay, yeah, I'll have a look at that. Yeah, Mark?
I just think it's similar to what's just been discussed in terms of, you know, what's possible and isn't. I don't think we should be at all worried about also marking in what we're talking about, what we know we can do. Not, and when I say we, not necessarily us, but in instance, what we know is sort of at least understood. You know, so you can actually do stuff we know how to do, but haven't done yet, and stuff that we see that needs doing and we want to do. You know, because that also I think that's useful for people who are interested, who actually have an interest in this, but for one of two reasons. Either some people may pop out of the woodwork saying, no, we know how to do this, which is great. We find some new stuff we want to know about, and it just gives it also gives some grounding to people who sort of otherwise will see nothing or everything and have difficulty in triaging sort of where we are in between. And I don't think that has to detract in any way from any sort of wow factor of what's being proposed, but it's more just having, you know, some kind of markup, or if necessary, just a you know, a sort of footnote of some sort to it, explaining that, yes, this is a scenario, but how it unpacks in 2022 is like this. Because to a certain extent, that speaks well to what we've been doing here and the things we've been trying to put some firm edges on.
Yeah, no, because the document is already too long and introduction, and most people couldn't be bothered to read it. But what I do say later on in the document is some of the things we have done. And inside the scenario itself, there is one section where I mention this is now already possible in Quest 2, because it's a surprising thing. But I'm just really wary of slowing people down, because even people who are relatively interested in this find it, I mean, why in the world would they read all these pages that I've written, right? That's why we need one or two things that put on the headset and you see it. We can fake it. Interactions, of course, are key. But if we can't do interactions, let's just at least have it as visuals. We got to put something on people's heads.
Well, with the wonder of the web, anyway, of course, that the information I'm suggesting could be in a separate document, which wouldn't be read by those who weren't interested in it. But if, you know, in a sense, you want to see how this maps onto where things are. It's also a useful exercise to do, because as ever when documenting stuff, if you can't describe it, you probably don't, unless it's sheer fantasy, you don't really understand what you thought you understood. So it's a useful dog fooding
But
exercise.
Mark, this is the kind of thing you hate. This is hyperbole. This is not about what we can and cannot do. That isn't what this scenario is trying to do. It's trying to say, we're 5 or 10 years in the future. You put on this amazing headset. Here's a few. It's like a little movie. Unfortunately, it has to be written because we can't make it.
Okay, don't worry. No, you've misunderstood. Don't worry. Just leave it. We'll park it.
No, wait,
No. Move on. Honestly, move on. We're getting distracted.
I'd like to suggest that you separate it out in the book and probably for the conference as well into a separate document, so that people can skip the whole introduction part of it up to page whatever it is, 14. They can skip. They don't even need to do that. They can go right to it. And secondly, I would like to suggest that you put in lots of subheads in it, so that we can understand what is going on quickly and easily.
Yeah, I mean, it already has a ton of subheads, a ton of headings in it. And like any document, you can skip any section you want. You don't have to read it linearly. It does have a table of contents. It does have full visual meta, so you can skip around it as much as you want. This is intended to be the introduction to the book. Not a lot of people read introductions. The one thing that I'm working more on, that I've only done well a few places, is to mention the people who are contributing to the book, not just as a list, but in line. Like,
But now you're off from the scenario. You're not talking about the scenario, right?
the scenario is part of the introduction.
Yeah, I understand that, because I looked at the document. You don't need, what that's all I'm going to say right now.
Can you clarify that? Because I obviously didn't understand what you meant.
Well, where it seems like in this situation that we're in, that we're both discussing the scenario as something that's going to be in the book, and the scenario that's going to be in the conference coming up.
The scenario is currently and planned for the future just to be a part of the introduction. But this introduction will be shared with everybody who's going to the conference, so they have a clue of our framing of the conference, along with anybody who's presenting can also share an abstract before the day. And this is why I think it would be useful if we can try to bring some aspect of it to life.
So one thing that I can, I've just been skimming the document as you two are talking. One thing that I would take from Bob's perspective of the number of headings and subheads to pepper in is that, if you're to follow sort of an information block style sort of quantity of things, then essentially every 7 sentences or so, if there is a separable, identifiable heading that can be kind of pulled out. And many paragraphs start with something that is indicative of what that paragraph will be. But I think perhaps Bob's point would be that actually elevating that so that it is sort of legible from a more directly scannable perspective helps to.
Have a look at page 18. Is that what you mean? Except for the bullets, which we don't need.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
But, for example, page 15, where we have VR, that essentially have, if every one of these sort of paragraphs has an idea in it, it actually doesn't hurt legibility. It just goes against style conventions to call out what that paragraph is as a separate sort of component to the copy of that paragraph. And I'm inclined to agree. I think that's a constructive innovation in terms of being able to tell what they'll read when they read this, because it means that it still permits people to breeze over that word, that stuff they're reading sort of all the way through, but it also represents rememberable handles and seekable handles, which I think at some level can limit fatigue of people's sort of, oh, here's another paragraph that I have to read without knowing what I'm getting into.
Yeah, I
So,
do
yeah.
agree. I mean, it is what I've done on page 5. If you look at headings, no, not headings, but bold. Headings, though, the problem with them is they take a line, and that means it can often get really, really scattered. But the list of potential interactions, which you should absolutely feel free to add to if you want, that's both bolded and listy. So working on different ways to make it more readable, I completely agree. But that's the document. How can we go beyond the document?
You know, what I'd like to see is if you're describing, and we're trying to help you here, if we can, I'd like to see what would be a list, even to begin with, or at the end or somewhere, what would be different from what we can do now in or soon in virtual reality. In other words, if you're talking 5 to 10 years from now, then 5 to 10 years from now, what will be different from what we can do now is the following. And maybe, and then, if
But that's what
possible,
this-
picture it.
Bob, that is exactly what I'm trying to do. The scenario is not written what we can do now. It is all written about what can be done in the future. Very few things there can be done now. And as far as pictures are concerned, yes, I will be curating some of the work we're already done, putting screenshots in at the end of the document. But I also think it would be very useful if we have some links so people can at least see some of this from how it is now, because visually, all of this can be done now, but the metadata to allow for the interaction to happen, that's in the future.
I think, Fred, I don't think anyone's arguing against that. I think if we sort of reference back to Doug's demo, and of course now with the benefit of hindsight, people say, well, look, you saw all the following being demonstrated. And of course, it's hard to put names on things that haven't necessarily been codified yet. But I think really what Bob's driving at is if there's some sort of a summation of, you know, it's not whether we get it the right terminology, but just a short idea to hold on to. Both to take you through the text and
Mark and Bob, you haven't read the scenario. That is what it is. The scenario.
No, we have. Well, we're just trying to suggest, but it's clearly not. It's don't worry. I'll let somebody else do it.
Give me an example then. If you look at, let's say, page 10 where it starts, which bit of it would you like me to highlight in which way? So that I'm not misunderstanding, because I think that is what I have done. That's why it's difficult to take the advice to change it. Or, you know, page 11 or so on.
So for instance, look at page 11, second full paragraph starts. You also choose how visible your hand movements will be. So there's an idea in that paragraph, and I'm not sure, you know, doing it literally as I pause it and read it, I'm not sure exactly what there is, but I think there's a heading that can come out, which seems to be getting to the gist of the interaction, how we appear to others.
So you just want to have a heading there?
Well, that's what Bob was suggesting. Yeah, you know.
I thought you and Bob were arguing also that I need to highlight what can be done now and what can be done in 10 years. This section...
No, it wasn't what can be done now. It's what is already achieved using traditional or non-spatial systems versus what would be an innovation that brings that is brought about as a consequence of spatial interaction. Whether that itself is achievable at this moment or not is largely irrelevant because none of it is done.
Hang on, we're talking about two different things. If we're talking about if we're talking about the actual document itself, the way it is on page 5, where each section has bolded what it's about, is that what you guys mean in terms of making the scenario more readable?
No. So I think my preference is actually for the information blocks approach of actually elevated subheadings. I appreciate the impact that has on the textual density, and no, I don't know, Bob, if you have any particular hints or tips about that, whether you have marginal headings versus inline things, or whether you mess with the type matrix to make sure that you can compress it down. But it's one of those challenges that is specifically related to the expectation of document as printed page versus electronic document that I think is worth considering, given the frequency with which documents are nowadays never even printed out. But the second one is yes. So that's the sort of the stylistic sort of formal appearance of the document. But the second one I think Bob was talking about is what is different, sort of notionally, about what's achieved, what in the scenario is achieved through these spatial modes of computing, distinct from or above what can be done on the present sort of not just technology but modalities of these things. And if you like, you can talk about what's achievable technically, but it's not necessary. Is that a fair characterization, Bob?
Sure, yes. And I'm now looking at page 5. It isn't part of the scenario, is it?
No. Oh my,
No.
it's not part of the scenario, but I have bolded things to make it easier to read. Okay. You guys don't need to prove.
I just took that as advertising, bolding as how, why we're talking about the importance of things. And I agree with that. I think that bolding is good for getting, me to look at your main messages here, because, because this is an introduction, and I'm going to skip most of it because, that's what I do. That's how I read.
Okay, but we're talking
You're
about,
trying to help me do that.
we're looking at several different things. Brandel wants more subheads. I'll see what I can do. The second issue that's been brought up a few times is what can be achievable in VR now, and what versus what is traditional. The entire scenario from page 10 onwards for a few pages is intended to show what you need VR to be able to do. That's why I think it's a bit artificial to highlight basically every single thing in it. And I don't think it is useful for the kind of audience we're expecting to talk about what can be done in VR with a Quest 2 and what can be done in 5 years. I think this is the reason for the scenario is simply somebody who isn't really into VR. You read this like, oh, maybe it'll be useful, and not have to worry about which version of VR we're talking about.
Is that who you expect to come to the conference?
I expect this to be a relative.
Who you expect to be the readers of this of volume 3?
I expect the readers to be a mix of people who are interested in the future of text and people who are interested in VR. However, people who are already sold on VR, they may choose to read this to see if there are any nuggets that they haven't thought about. But the kind of the main point of this scenario is twofold. One, you can do cool, useful stuff. Two, it won't be possible unless we upgrade the infrastructure. And if we do upgrade the infrastructure for VR, all digital text will benefit. That's the message here. But so far, the fact that I can't convince someone like Vince, and the fact that there are many things that us here going through VR again and again are realizing are issues, how to kind of weave that together into a coherent narrative.
I don't think you're doing anything. I mean, I can see the frustration. I don't think you're doing anything wrong. I think part of the problem is that it is actually the infrastructure part that really needs fixing. I mean, the what you can do is quite compelling, but that's not where the heavy lift, I think, needs to be done at the moment. It's a lot of the bit. It's all the plumbing underneath that most of us on any given day really don't want to know about or care about. That has to just work in the way that we use the web now. And apart from the odd bad hair day, it just works. And I think that, as I heard you describe it, I think that's a difficult point, because the real punchline is actually we need to make the infrastructure better. But that's not a sexy sounding thing.
Yeah, so
You
in terms of the document, I will look at headings and boldings and so on. But are there, how should we try to illustrate some of this?
Well, maybe, just with some illustrations. For example, can I share my screen?
Sure.
How do I do that?
Green
You
button
move
in
to-
the toolbar.
Share
Yeah.
screen. All right. There we go. Oh, I see. Okay. There.
Not
Can I
yet.
click on desktop 1 and share? Does that work?
Let's see.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, we're looking at your old book, I think. Your older book.
This could be a picture of something that you might see in virtual reality, right? Those figures could be the avatars, and that could be down below your desktop, and that could be some of your databases. That begins to give a person a picture of what you might be able to see in virtual reality. With your current work very close here, connected to its related chunks of different kinds of information. There are different kinds of structures over here. Again, current structures, and then more abstract ones here, and even clusters of other documents or information that you have that are just tiny stars. That's one way of looking at it. Of course, this is 37 years old. So it would seem that we should be able to show something, like this quite easily in virtual reality in the scenario.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, I've toyed with building some of these representations actually in Blender. Something like Blender is a good tool for being able to pose figures. So Frodo, if you have a desire, then it would be pretty possible to do that kind of thing. But you could even pose real human bodies in real life and then take photographs of it and then draw over it as and where necessary.
Sure.
That's something that we've frequently done in the past at my advertising agency back many years ago, where you take pictures of people and then if you must, you sketch over them, have outline drawings, so that then the integration with other things becomes relatively straightforward. It's useful. And with the Linnaean Society stuff, you remember call it, I put human figure, a fairly blocky, simple human figure. Those kinds of things are sort of obtainable and posable in all sorts of different 3D software. And so it's possible to kind of put things together in really as rough, probably rougher than you can imagine, while still being illustrative of some core points. So I'm a strong proponent of just actual pencil sketching of some of these ideas. And so if you have an interest and an ability to do that, then it's definitely worthwhile.
And then
on Twitter.
Yeah. And then as just a small example, again, 37 years old, of the kind of structure, some kinds of possible structures, not anywhere near limited, are these kind of things. Something I called hypertrails at the time, which are trails, which are links, networks often, that have to do with prerequisites, classifications, chronologies, geographic or spatial connections, project connections, structural ones of objects and their parts, decision structures,
Okay.
definitional connections, and so forth.
Bob,
I'm ready to relieve the time here. How do I get out of? Oh no.
We can probably
Stop share. Okay, I see the button
you
here.
got it. Great.
Stop share. Okay.
Interestingly, thinking of the first picture Bob showed, that's also, and using that just as sort of mental prop for a moment, that's an interesting sort of way of thinking also how you might map some degree of progress. Because to a certain extent, where we are at the moment is we can take stuff and stick it on a wall in a virtual place or a wall that doesn't exist. But in a sense, that's sort of where we are on a trivial level. Where we aren't yet is you can't put your sort of hand into the middle of the spreadsheet or the graph or the document, or take the piece of text and do some of the transforms like in Brando's experiments. So that's one element that I think the scenario can illustrate.
I should be able to be back, but I've got to drop for a meeting. Yeah, but
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm a bit wary of using illustrations because it is literally a different medium, and illustrations, especially classical style illustrations, kind of skirt what VR is. It isn't that you have everything in front of you like this. It is that we use the different dimensions. And I think that the feeling that you get from being in the space is very, very different. That's why I think we should try to put some spaces in there. What do you think, Fabian? Just to put you on the spot.
It's always better. I have an opinion. It's of course always better if it's dynamic, and it definitely drives the point home, because then the user will use the content that's precious to them. That being said, it's still a second step. Like, it has to make sense. We can use an image at first and then confirm that it is actually good or bad. That's also okay. And if it's static, well, then we see, okay, make it worth it or not to invest to make it dynamic. I personally always think when we do studio mode, when we take one example, and if we just need to make sure not to invest too much time on that example that will not translate to other examples. That's the risk, that we make something beautiful for one thing and then none of it is reusable. And then we basically made one experience. But it's a place to start still.
Just for clarification, when I was speaking earlier, I wasn't being literal about it. I said, using the image as a sort of metaphor, but it was useful as that was being talked to. I was thinking, yes, one of the sort of changes I see between sort of where we are and where we're trying to get to is the fact that we can take something at the moment. We can take most of our digital documents and we can put them into our virtual environment, so we can have those documents. Essentially, we can have our 2D things in a 3D setting. The stage we haven't gone, we haven't yet done with any facility or repeatability, is to just take any of those things and actually have a richer digital interaction with them. I mean, whether that's explaining them out or just changing the way we display them or whatever. But the point is doing things with those documents in 3D that we can't do with them in 2D.
So the link that I just put in are the things we already have. We have a few globe tests. We got a Linnaean library. We have the mural. We have a constellation of concepts. We have another library. These are the kinds of things I think we can just keep going, build a few and see which ones are most impressive. I mean, all we're trying to do here is twofold. One, oh my God, I didn't realize VR could be this cool. I can immediately picture it better. And then, oh, the infrastructure isn't there. We must work on it. That's it. We're not trying to sell a piece of commercial software. We're not trying to sell the gaming aspect or the social aspect. We're trying to sell the infrastructure. not just visual meta, obviously, there's a ton of other things, but the whole fact that it needs to be worked on.
Sure, and I don't mean the following is a pejorative, but I'm sort of cautious about the sense of things being cool, because really, in the sense of the work, you want things to be useful and informative.
No,
that-
no, Mark, no, absolutely not, because that's too expensive. To really find what's useful, we really have to think about it, implement it, test it, see what works and what doesn't work. And of course, in reality, no question, you're right. But for this purpose, all I'm trying to do is someone who is VR curious, VR not converted, put on the head, get a sense that, there is more behind it. And then they can start reading about our work and then start working on things.
Okay, I think you misunderstood. I was literally just talking about the terminology. I'm just saying that in a sense, it's what you would call, just cautious that it can actually give the counter to what we're trying to say, is that, you know, there really is something we can do beyond entertainment, which is, you know, where sort of such term tends to take my mind when I hear people use it. That's all I meant.
Okay.
Bye, Bob.
Oh.
Thanks to Freud, just quickly.
I saw the email, Peter. It's been a crazy busy day, so I haven't had a chance to read it properly. But we should go through that. But I mean, we're kind of, if we're going to, with the future of text now, we've been doing it for 10 years. Well, I've been doing it for 10 years, and you guys have been around for, you know, several things there. There's always a thought of, hey, let's build something. You know, and a lot of it ends up being how to deal with our own record, which we are kind of working on. At this point, though, I've really had to do a bit of soul searching lately. And I've been thinking, okay, I know that some of my text things are better than what's available in the world. I know that obviously Doug's work was much, much bigger than anything I can do, but also even he didn't have success beyond the beginning. Why is that? It comes down to the curiosity thing. People know, quote unquote, what text is. The fact that VR is about to happen is such a moment for us. And that is why I think it is so important that we have, you know, we put our friends under the headset, show them a few things, and just give them a feel for, oh my goodness, this will be amazing. And then afterwards explain the issues. That's why I mean cool. It has to feel cool. It has to feel pleasant. It has to feel natural. It has to feel like you're being extended, you know.
I mean, thinking of Doug's stuff, and one thing springs to mind, of course, that we see all the things he did with the benefit of hindsight and have come to pass. But one thing that didn't happen is that there wasn't actually somebody who a year later sort of built a better augment. What actually happened, a lot of the things that we now see as sort of structural technologies, individuals went and took and polished and created, whether because of that or just because they sort of they reached their natural moment in time. So we you know, is a danger of us in hindsight thinking that the wow is having all the ideas there. You're right in saying it's partly bringing people to the stage of thinking, actually, no, this is something that's not just a pipe dream now, and we should engage with it, whether we do it ourselves or whether we are just at least not an impediment to the people who are trying to do it, because even that's a help.
Yeah. So Peter, I think I'm going to ask Vint to send the headset I sent to him over to you, because he is not using it. I think that would be more useful. So see how that goes. But you know, going through that list of resources that we already have, is there anything we should expand on or something new we should try to make? You know, in terms of writing it into the scenario, that's dead easy. You know, one paragraph of, oh, and then the person decided to go to the Lane Museum and blah, 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 saw this and that, you know?
I think it's worth almost sketching that, not necessarily your main document. and the reason for that, because it's difficult trying to do it in the thing. The last thing I want to do is sort of try and redraft a document while we're all here. Is so we have this number of things that have been produced by the group here, or indeed things that other people have produced, but sort of just mapping them onto the scenario. Because, for instance, what bits of the scenario that we're positing don't have anything that represents them? And that's sort of bad thing, but it's being sort of where they are. I don't, with any sort of sense of confidence, know quite what that map looks like. And it's not a be all and it's not a be all and end all. It's more something to inform our understanding of the story we're telling.
Yeah. Just looking at our section with text and VR. There is that paragraph on the text in VR, third paragraph. Considering that you have full access to advanced graphical, both in 2D and 3D, as well as video authoring systems, think about how surprising it is that you still use so much of the ancient technology of symbols in your work text. I mean, I do think one of the unique things is to keep things from getting messy, that you assign things in a room AR style. So even if you sit in the garden, you can have the same information, and now they're on bushes rather than walls. That can't easily be illustrated.
It's interesting you say that, because the plethora of books I've been reading the last year all argue sort of, in a sense, well, argue is the wrong word, but what comes out from it is, in fact, that one of the, in a sense, that, pictures are where hieroglyphics are. And actually, one of the things that's really moved our ability to think and move forward was the move to what you're describing as symbols of text. Now, there is a problem that we don't all use the same alphabet, and we don't all use the same language using the same alphabet. So there are problems. But one of the ability to basically not have to find placeholders for every idea is one of the things that text has unlocked. So, which is why, I understand why sort of emojis made sense when it was expensive to spend texts and you had a tiny phone and stuff. And they're still kind of cutesy, but I'm unconvinced, for instance, that's a way to usefully communicate things. It's normally used as a label in areas where you want something like an international notice that needs to be understood. But it's actually quite hard to get things unambiguous, because we also know that most graphics are not unopinionated. Red traffic lights mean something else in some parts of the world. So, yeah, images are in that sense just as flawed. I don't think there's anything particularly wrong with the textual metaphor. To me, where the excitement of the potential of VR is our ability to sort of deconstruct it and to interact with it. Probably not so much at letter level, but probably more at word level.
Yeah, okay. So I don't think we're going to get much further on this discussion today as to what we may want to show. But Fabienne, we've been talking about some things. Did you want to go through some things?
Sure. Very random, so I warn you in advance. So let me share my screen. Let me know if you see it.
Yeah.
So yes, let me see if I can hide all that. The first thing was basically focusing on a piece of text. So you just imagine a web page, a normal article, and what's in the middle of the screen gets big, and what's far away, let's say at the top and at the bottom, or imagine your screen is in a portrait mode also. But yeah, what's closed is in full view, let's say 100%, and then the furthest away, the smaller it is. And to make it look a bit much gentler, so if it scrolls automatically, so the paragraphs grow bigger as until, let's say, 100%.
Yeah,
The
a lensing effect, right?
Yes,
Mm.
yeah, something like that.
But it strikes you, more practical than the fisheye, because then you get a distortion all the way around. What's really nice here, and especially I can see this actually for reading, because one of the things that I can see for any individual, take a little time to sort of set up for one individual style, but one to set up what, because basically it's reading for you. In terms of it's moving the pages for you, which is another reason to break the moment if you're actually trying to read and be absorbed. Just as much in work documents as we do in reading novels. So I like this.
I did that a couple of days ago. I did not reuse it after, but mostly because I forget. Like, it hasn't grown into a habit yet, but I did like it. I don't remember. I think I did not put a shortcut for it, but yeah, one little thing also, it's not a little thing, but a little annoying thing is I did not check in depth, but the content of a page is different per page. Like the actual content, for example, here on Twitter would be in the middle, but this is just menu. This is dark patterns to make you click on stuff. So yeah, this, I know that there were some libraries to do it, but it's not universal yet, is my point. I can't go on any web page and then expect it would work. But it might, because, for example, in Firefox, I'll take if I take some news, and then there is something positive, there is this reader's view, which does basically remove the noise, quote unquote. So one could rely on the equivalent of reader view to make sure that it only displays the content. But yeah, that was pretty positive.
Because it's interesting with reader view, it's sort of been around, but it's also had to fight against a degree of commercialism, in the sense that obviously the marketing department would much rather you were following all their dark patterns and clicking stuff and
Yes.
doing multiple page loads. So one interesting observation I take from that is in a sense, these sort of things add weight to effectively an expectation of a sort of reader mode. In other words, well, gets back to the thing, you can get to, for want of a better word, the body copy of the document, words,
Yes.
graphs, whatever, without all the rest of the craft. And that's then, you reverse the pattern. You say, well, fine, marketing department, now go play with that on you. But if you can't provide this, you don't get to the front gate. It's sort of turning the expectation around, because to a certain extent, that's one of the things that went wrong with the early web, is the monetization of it was driving the design far faster than some of the people who are thinking seriously about making useful things with it. But that was lovely to see.
There is a little trick to make it easier. Let's say for example, if you read mostly, I don't know, the New York Times or whatever, then you can inspect the page, and then you end up with, let's say, the center more or less of it. Mm-hmm. And then at least in Firefox, if you do use in console, then suddenly it became a variable. So you can use that in your code directly. So it's a mix of having it visually available, but still in code. So that was a pretty efficient way, especially that if it takes you 10 seconds, let's say, to do this, to find the right position of the page, but then it's an article that's going to take you 15 minutes to read, then it's worth it, I would say, to do this. But yeah, if one can rely directly on reader view, because as you say, the kind of marketing department evilness is dynamic because they're paid for it. But with reader view, they're also contributors that work on it. So then you can rely on their updates. But yeah, I remember there are ways to access it, but I did not use that yet. Other things is because we had discussion about AI and it became more and more, how do you say, popular those days, is to do text to image. So those are images that were generated there on my computer. And the last one was, yeah, potatoes. But yeah, what I think is interesting, so you just give it a prompt. So here that was whale painting in Europe. This was text in the shape of the Eiffel Tower, poetic tree with sunset, and virtual reality headset made out of wood. So none of them is amazing, but in my opinion, they kind of work. And what I liked it is, well, first it was, the source of it is text, but it's also running on my machine. Like it's not running on the cloud of someone else. So I thought that was pretty nice to be able to, one can imagine doing this or otherwise with voice. And I thought the other day of doing it when you wake up, and then you just summarize in one sentence your dream, and then you go brush your teeth, and when it's done, then you have like one illustration of your dream.
Because this look, I hope I sent an email, I think, to everyone here, something that I came across the same or something similar that someone was using in Discord, and I only came across it because, in fact, he was mapping out his novel, and I thought, well, that's really interesting. So basically, he was doing exactly in a sense as what you said. He had this person, or he had a scene or something, which he'd describe it, have some auto-generated art, which he then uses his memory palace effectively tag for that thing in a 3D space. So I thought that was actually quite an interesting thing, especially as a long. I thought it was book, but there you go.
And honestly, it's getting better and better. There is something, I mean, there are quite a few different implementations. But yeah, again, the big thing was, imagine some of you heard about OpenAI. And I really hate it because they show good results. They have open in the name, but then they don't let you access either the code or the data. Or maybe the code, but it's basically pointless unless you have like as much computing power as Google or a government. So yeah, not that nice. So yeah, there is a democratization on that side. And that led me to generalize a bit more. So that was earlier today, where basically I take an article and then I send it to another AI, let's say, algorithm. This one not on my machine, but it could be fetched on the machine, but it's a text summarization. So if I'll do this article, and if I press the Q shortcut on my keyboard, it sent the URL to that service, let's say, and I have here like 2 lines summary. And the idea behind this, so of course, this text to text, like summarization, is that you can go from either your machine or an API and have, whatever services are available. And you can also fall back from one to the other. So if I can move this, aside, the idea was to cascade it basically, where you prefer privacy, then you only try to run it on your machine, or if you have a server on your server. If you don't have it, then you use like Hugging Face. It's a popular service for AI that does, for example, the summarization, went through it. And I just need this kind of like basically 10 lines. I send a piece of text, or here it's an image, but that's been transformed, let's say, to a string, so to text. And then I get the result. So you could either optimize for speed, if you don't care about privacy, because it's not, let's say, your dream. I would consider my dreams pretty private, and then I would not want to send to someone else. But I don't know, if I'm in rush or if I did not set it up, then do this kind of model. So the idea being that you send your text, your image, whatever you want to, instead of the art AI services, either at home if you have it, or if you don't want to set it away, or wherever. so based on your preferences. And some other services for this were, for example, the OCR, like it flips the image, and same, it's not run on the page, but rather it converts it to text and then send it to the service and show back the result, which is somewhere there. Forgot where. No, this one did not work. This one did work. So yeah, little tinkering with AI. And the last, I know, two things. One thing was this AI stuff is fun. Let's say the OCR or summarization, but that takes quite a bit of resource. And I think I mentioned it on the chat on Twitter about this project called Epic Compromise. And it's fun in the sense that it's a big compromise. When you look at natural language processing, then they basically have a huge data set and a lot of computing power and takes time. So you can't do it in the browser, basically. But this is a very small library, smaller than an image. And then you can do simple and fancy stuff. Like, for example, something I started to play with was comparing different chat logs or transcript of our conversation to find either the portion or the entire text that was the closest to a past conversation. For example, to make sure we don't go in loops, because sometimes that happens. So yeah, you have solutions like this, distance between text, basically. But yeah, the funny things with this one is it runs all in the browser. And one thing I did with it that could also be applied is if you take a text, you can, I don't know if I save that part. So that's the piece of text. And then, yes, you can highlight grammar, let's say, verbs and whatnot, but also it can detect places or organizations or names. And then what I hope that managed to do, and all this again is done in the browser.
So it's been, so the red text is just being done with some CSS or something?
Yeah, so you give it some filters. Let's say go back here. So it processes the text, and then the three filters here were is for you put anything in green for the organizations, in red for the places, and in blue for the persons. And here it has some functions to detect organizations.
Yeah, because it's sort of interesting just seeing that and thinking about the conversation we were having right at the start, and thinking about, effective image maps and things. So it's one thing to say there's something here, this box on the screen in the virtual world, rather, it has significance. So it's a question what you pass across. If you click where Prague is or what's on the screen there in your virtual world, what would it say? Would it say Prague, or would it say this is Prague, but this is also location, so that the agent receiving something? So that's one of the things I've really been thinking of at the moment is sort of, it says building from this sort of thing. What's in the translation layer, what's dereferenced around it, and how much of that we can do sort of with today's documents by shimming it back in, or with sidecar files or something, as opposed to where we might build it in the future.
So ideally here, I think what would be the neatest is, instead of just doing the visual, probably to attach some metadata that say it's a place. So for example, how would I do this here?
I mean, I've done it in the past in things, other contexts, where I've just deliberately used CSS names that I knew I had a deliberate sort of code, so that effectively I had classes that had no string.
Yeah,
but they were because I could access them via the DOM, which seems a bit cheeky because that's a bit playing fast or loose with the presentational aspect of it. But that's certainly one thing I could see one could do at the moment.
Yeah. So this is the what's the name? specifically NLP compromise. I spent an hour or two, not much on it, but it was really pretty efficient. And you can do things like, yeah, detecting adverbs, pronoun, verb, conjunction, add them, conjugate, a lot of things, to the point that I suggested for the author to come tell us a bit about his library. And eventually, he tell us a bit more than my naive understanding of it. But I was very excited by it, because it also means if I take my page and I take some text on it, then I can include the library, NLP compromise, and when the user sees, or rather when the user browses, then dynamically it looks in the text, is it a new name, is it I don't know, a place for a person. So yeah, a lot of interesting things could be extracted from the user, from the browser side, so that it remains dynamic. Otherwise, if it's with like NLTK or big libraries like this, you port once your content and then maybe you never refresh it. So I thought that was a
so
good
it's
way.
nice too, because it seems to me that this is also congruent with your idea you mentioned earlier for another thing where you choose where to run it. So at least you could run this, and you could run this in the client, and if you wanted the privacy, you wanted the speed or whatever, but it doesn't stop you in a sense, saying, okay, then I'm going to back that out, and I'm going to back it onto some annoying computer somewhere. So that's really nice too. Yeah,
exactly. That's the cascading aspect. If you can, or if you want to, you do it locally, and if you can't, you push it either to your server or to someone else's server. So yeah, that's and I think honestly, my mindset changed a bit like this for everything AI related. Is a lot of it was buzz that I did not enjoy, even more so when it was black box. Because if it's buzz and I can't even tinker with it, then yeah, it's useless for me. And I have to trust the person who's made it, which, yeah, I don't want to. Whereas now I see that there are a lot more things are more achievable, basically. Higher quality and more achievable and more able to run locally. So I think that becomes like a proper democratization of the field. And the last thing was for VR specifically, which is, I can't zoom in and I don't have, but anyway, it's a window manager in VR for Linux. So that's where you have those terminals. I saw this headset that I did not hear about until today, called Simula VR. It's pretty high end, like it's 2,000 or 3,000 euros, I think. It's completely different mindset than the other. It's not for gaming. It's for geeking around or doing nerdy stuff like programming in the headset. But yeah, it has a pretty powerful CPU. The GPU, I don't know it much. But yeah, it doesn't run Android. It runs just Linux. And the whole stack is, as far as I can tell, open source. But yeah, why do I mention it here is because you see the kind of content that they are showcasing. They don't showcase game. They show you a desktop. You organize your windows around. You read text. You select text. You move that text from one virtual window in the air to another. Yeah.
So the fact that this runs Linux, if you're talking about web-based VR, it doesn't matter, right?
Well, it kind of is actually, but for bad reasons. There is no web VR on Linux at the moment, or WebXR. There is no browser that supports WebXR. But here, what you have here is actually a browser. So I'll pause it. That's a browser here. The person is running Google, or maybe even Office 360, I don't know. Google Sheets, I think. So you have a browser, but that browser only showcases 2D content, like a window. It doesn't pop out, let's say, of that window, which I think is a bit of a shame. But yeah, that's not their priority. So you could, does it make sense?
Yeah, no, I certainly thought real 3D pie charts, which Office users the world over have wanted for years, not.
That's really, but if you wanted to try, unfortunately, you would have to do it let's say, natively, not through web for this specific headset. So for that part, I don't like it, but and I tried, just for the anecdote, to run to patch Firefox, and I was positively surprised because I built Firefox, the whole browser, on my desktop in less than half an hour. So that was way faster than I thought. It's 30 gigabyte of source, so that's pretty gigantic, but it's quick built. And somebody did a patch to make it run on Linux, but it did not work on my machine. I think it works, but not on, I mean, it's very experimental, let's say. So yeah, that part, the WebXR on Linux, sadly is not working at the moment. So that cannot help this. But all the applications, including a web browser, E2D, would work. So you can use your let's say GIMP or even Blender or design some PCB or whatever you do on your desktop there. And they focus on productivity. So that's why you see someone with a keyboard and not really playing games.
Yeah, interesting. But how much productivity can you get if it's Linux? I mean, I guess there is enough software, but do normal productivity people use Linux? Don't they use?
Is it a joke or
No,
are you serious?
No, I am serious. I mean, I'm a Mac user, so I know that Mac users are a minority, and an average Office user will use Windows, right? So how many people who don't work in knowledge in IT themselves use Linux on their desktop?
So it depends if you mean productivity as popularity or how productive is productivity per person or whatnot. So
No, I don't mean it like that. I'm not being disparaging. I'm just saying, as a Mac user, that's the first thing people say to me, why do you make software for Author? I mean, a normal office person in management or something wouldn't use Linux, right? So what are the kind of user groups for this?
True, but I don't think a normal person would use VR. Like a normal quote-unquote person is going to use Microsoft Office and poorly on Windows, but I don't think that's necessarily interesting.
Yeah, I would say to that end, an enormous number of secondary students use Chrome OS and other forms of Linux these days. While we can quibble about the effectiveness of the average school, the kind of workload they're typically doing that is pretty analogous to productivity software. They are in documents, they're in spreadsheets, they're doing research of various kinds. And there's a lot of communications that they're getting in via the back door. There's a phenomenal amount of innovation in how people use use a Google Doc to stand in for chat rooms, which I'm very thrilled by. But yeah, so it's one of the reasons why it's actually less visible as well is because fewer people are profiting from it. So it's less necessarily about the total quantity of people and more about who has the opportunity to clip the ticket. Microsoft Word and these other for-pay applications have a vested interest in making sure that the fact that they make money making these things means that everybody believes that that's the only way to be able to do productivity. But certainly, like the last time I used it, Star Office and Open Office were comparable in a way that means that a lot of people can do it. And there are places in academia and things where people are doing productivity in that way as well.
I'm not questioning or disparaging what can be done on Linux. I was just talking about what kind of users there are. Because, for instance, if I were to buy this, invest the money and buy it, I wouldn't be able to put it to use. I know, of course, there are very many people dedicated.
No. Sorry to interrupt, but there is literally every tool you can imagine is available on Linux. You might at first, if you're like super somebody who knows every single shortcut in, let's say, Photoshop, they switch to any other software. Of course, at first they're going to stumble, But once they have the concept, one software, another, it's about
Yeah,
the same.
I'm not disparaging it at all. That is not my intention. It's not like Mac versus
don't
Windows
understand.
is better. All I was questioning was the user base and numbers. That's all I meant.
It's a niche in a niche.
Yep.
So I honestly, I'll be surprised if they cut their loss. I'm how do you say? I enjoy the project. I might not even put money on it because I'm still learning about it. It's very expensive, but it might be worth it. So if all my devices are basically Linux and I work in VR did not like put my credit card in it instantly, I don't know, maybe 1,000 people on Earth will buy it. Maybe less. So yeah, I'm also not saying it's for everyone. That being said, that's an argument I had yesterday about WebXR on Linux. It's the few people who who truly are interested. Maybe 50% of them are programmer and who are eager to push the field forward and explore. So that very small amount of people will definitely do something that hasn't been done before. Will it be interesting? Will it have an impact? Maybe not, but for sure there'll be some novelty there. So that's why I think it's at least to keep this kind of project in mind. It's not going to be the Quest 3 or the PSVR 2. There is no doubt about that.
Yeah.
So basically nothing's happening on Linux, I think is what we take away from that. Well, I just want to say a quick thanks to Brandel. I had a book taken. So one of the things that arrived is this. Fab. Enjoyed it. And I'm also reading the language book.
Yeah, Buxton is a wonderful broad view on what it is that software development is and innovation through his many chapters of working in a lot of different places. And while it's dated, I really love his sort of pretty conscientious case study of iPod, what it is that actually makes iPod, and his model of the long nose of innovation hopefully should quiet some panic about the urgency of various aspects of virtual reality. I mean, that said, Lanier was doing this in the early 80s, and Sutherland's initial computer display, well after Sketchpad was actually an augmented reality display in '65. So we've been going a while, but yeah.
And I
take it to mean we have time.
As part of my sort of looking into image maps and things, I found myself looking through the which is the www talk archives, and got sort of down the rabbit hole of when they were talking about VR in '94. So.
I remember I was so thrilled, and people started putting VR arcade machines in local arcades in my hometown. But people and you would win the ability to buy candy by giving chocolate bar wrappers and things. And at first it was very popular, and then it was not popular, and then you didn't need the wrapper anymore, and then they took it out.
Yeah, that seems like a common thread, that a lot of it is a bit flash. Anyway, so we've gone through lots of useful things, especially the analysis bit, Fabian, that you just showed. It seems to me that there isn't an appetite in the group to discuss what we should try to visualize. So I'll try to do that offline. If anybody has any ideas, please feel free to send them.
I had a chance to read the document, but I'll look through that and think about what kinds of ways can be recommended. Yeah, I mean, the kinds of digital storyboarding applications that are even more simplified than something like a Blender are really phenomenal for the idea of being able to set up shots and poses and move people around. Similar to, if you recall back in the day, Meta Creations Poser. That was a really interesting program that people used for various bizarre purposes, but it could be used for basic sort of storyboarding as well. That book, yes, it's called Sketching User. Yes, and BillBuxton.com is the fella's website. He has updated it so long ago that it's still on HTTP. But yeah, wonderful on the history and potential future of user interface.
So has he got to the stage where he's allowed to not use any styling at all? Because that shows you serious greybeard.
Yes.
You write only in uppercase tags and all. You know?
Yeah, so I mean, what I'll be looking into is more the meeting room experience to see how that can be fleshed out, because in the scenarios, there's very little there. It just says you put things on the wall and you can move them about. So if anybody has any specific thoughts of how that could be implemented, that would be interesting.
Peter, have you got I see your hands up.
Yeah, I wanted to. Okay, yeah, I'm not muted. Good. Just wanted to touch on the author map view for a moment. I'd like to see that. It'd be interesting to see that extended into the VR in three-dimensional space. Then you could really have interesting little clusters of ideas in different locations. I love how we have the solid link for the direct reference and the gray link to the back reference on the lines between them. And I sent an email to Frodo before suggesting that when the concept definition dialog box comes up, often the obscure part of the map I wish I could see when writing the concept definition. So I suggested the possibility that we could have that be a movable dialog box, or maybe give it a translucency slider, or let us hold down the option key or something to momentarily suppress its display without having to formally save or close the dialog box. That would make it a lot easier there. Also, when you double click on a concept that doesn't exist in the text, you currently get offered the option of having the concept name get dropped into the text of the document. And it would be really nice if there was also an option to drop the definition of the concept into the main document. That would make it a lot easier to use when designing programming language grammars and other concepts like that, where the most natural way to enter the data is through the concept definition dialog box, but I want that text to appear inline in the document so that I will be able to browse it in the context of the other concepts that it doesn't. And a final suggestion was that in concept definition dialog box, it would be nice if there was a checkbox that would allow it to be garnered from the text. And that would enable us to have the piecewise definition of a concept at multiple locations in the document. This is one of the most powerful things in literate programming systems I've worked with, in that they allow you to have multiple definitions of a concept, and then all of those definitions get concatenated together to produce the final version of it that gets spliced in when generating output. So what that feature would do would be, imagine if you had the name with 2 colons, and then a little bit later, you had 2 colons followed by the name of the concept. And then the text between those tags could be grabbed and become the definition of the term. And that would allow us to have multiple definition blocks at different locations in the text. But when we're in the concept map view, accessing the definition to see the definition as all of those pieces summed together. The real reason that's helpful in the literate programming concept is many programming languages require that, for instance, all variable declarations appear at the start of a program for a file. In a literate programming system, in each subsection of the program, you'll add to the set of global variables at that location in the document where it makes sense textually. But then when you render out to produce final program source code, they'll all get concatenated together and dumped at the very start of the file where they need to be for the programming language. If we had a feature like that, given the current JSON format file of the glossary, it'd be relatively trivial to write a command line tool to perform the tangle function of a web programming system without making any alterations to author whatsoever, because we can get from the JSON, the term, and the definition And from the definition, we could find the other definitions that are transitively linked to that in order to generate the final directed acyclic graph representation of the program text. And that could be done without modifying author by a separate companion tool to perform tangling and weaving to generate program files. But again, the only thing that's missing in author at the moment would be the piecewise definition capability that you have in dedicated literate programming systems. So those were the three big ideas that I shipped out in that email Frode this morning. Anybody else has any thoughts on that aspect of the interface, it'd be appreciated. I'm really using it a lot now for thinking about language grammars. Using the current tools in something like Microsoft Visual Studio Code Insiders Edition is kind of ugly and nowhere near as comfortable as navigating the map view and jumping into focus mode and the visualizations in author. It's just so much cleaner. One thing that's driven me crazy about the Code Insiders is that the interface just feels very, very cluttered. There's so many plugins to the system. There's so much that's very busy, and you have to think about, okay, which project am I in? Which plugins are active in this project? And visually, it's a mess. And you have to rely on one sidebar to provide a navigational, 1,000-mile up shrunken code representation of your entire file that you can drag around in between. And then you have a second sidebar that has a representation of the file tree, and it's just unduly cluttered and noisy. And you're using author such a calm experience by comparison. And like I say, if we had that piecewise definition capability, that would let us achieve everything functionally that you can achieve in a dedicated literate programming tool, but without getting all the extra cruft added on. So that's where my thinking has been going.
Yeah, that's a lot of thinking. Thanks, Peter. Something to think about for the longer term. Mark?
Two thoughts, just listening to Peter. Well, I'll take the last first, because I thought what was expressed quite nicely in your description of particular thing, the virtual Visual Studio thing is something that is sort of hard in 2D. So I've got this interface, it's cluttered, it's got too many bits, and what I really need to see is something cleaner. So I need another window, and I haven't got space for another window. Whereas actually in a virtual environment, you don't have that. You don't have that space limitation. You've got effectively an unlimited space. And so it's a really good example of. So it's not let's do it because we're doing it in VR, but let's do it because it actually makes it easier. So for instance, I maybe need the documentation very close to hand, or I need it sort of nearby. And again, that flexibility you have having to sort of push away through a lot of configuration things. The other thing, which is more like hard, was saying, right, well, couldn't I see the map in a more virtual form? And I was imagining, a long dot like your thesis. Rather like the beginning of Star Wars. So you have your long form, your linear document scrolling off where you can rub it up and down, interacting with this rich environment you've got or your defining terms, your concepts and your references and things. And that's something that probably I sense, I don't mean this afternoon, but that's something that's possibly buildable, if only to find out that it really doesn't work and it's a rubbish idea. Well, I'm going to have to bounce too.
Yeah, I mean, when it comes to those ideas in a virtual infinite space, it's really, really hard, as you've seen in Noda, Mark. If things are just in front of you, they're going to be too close or too far away. There's still going to be many, many limits. I do think it's important to examine those limits. What is the thing you're working on? How does it connect to other spaces? That does seem to be in itself a very large, important project. Fabian?
Yeah, just maybe to be a bit more positive is I definitely do think we should have things to play with in September. I'm not saying it should be the entire thing you listed. Maybe it could be, you just also evoked marked Noda before. It could be playing hubs, can be Noda, can be, I think, being together in a space to discuss about text and creating, managing knowledge, etc., with either some of the prototypes we've built, with some of the things we wish, or even with post-it notes. I know it doesn't as sexy, but if we have a room dedicated where we put post-it notes, maybe a version in Hubs or another in Noda, I'm very confident both us or some of us who are already convinced about it and others who are not yet, something very interesting will come out of it. I don't think we have to have something amazing and done and finished for it to be worthwhile.
But do you mean virtual post-its, or do you mean building a VR environment, or taking a room aside for where we're going to be?
I mean both, because the room that has physical post-it is easier to edit in general, but especially for non-developers, is you can just say, okay, the post-it should be like this, and then you stretch it and you take an A4 piece. So that's again the whole prototyping mindset that ideally we have everything and everything works perfectly, but real life slaps you in the face, and use post-it notes, and it's already a very fruitful step.
Well, the two most likely there's three likely locations for the physical event. One is the club. That's kind of a fallback, and the most prestigious would be the Royal Academy, which is a hugely fancy thing in London, huge building. But the third option is actually the Linnean Society, which is kind of in the Royal Academy in a way. I got in touch with them today just asking if they wanted to co-host. They said they cannot because it's too close in time. They would have to advertise it to people, but they're charging a very reasonable amount. It's something we can cover. So one of the thoughts is to, if we do use the Linnean, maybe we can look at some of the early work we did on that. You know, just since we are in this room with this information, or I mean, the other two locations are very near also, so it still would make sense. So we don't have to necessarily slavishly go after my scenario. That's just, you know, initial walkthrough. Okay, yeah, no, we're out of time anyway, but let's see what thoughts we have. So either something from the document or something from just the Linnean idea, or whatever we can. Okay,
Oh,
yes, sorry.
Yeah, one last crazy thought. Would it be possible for someone to have a stereo camera rig at a physical event, so people who can't physically be at the event could virtually be at the event?
Why would you need a stereo camera rig?
Well, I guess just a straight camera rig, just someone broadcasting videos. If you're walking around inside the Royal Society building or the Linnean Society, it'd be nice if someone could see a video feed of someone who's walking around there when listening in.
We're going to have several Zoom channels, so I'm sure I can have at least for, you know, during break or meeting, someone walking around at least with an iPhone on Zoom. So you have that is at the minimum if you choose to follow that person. So that's not a bad idea to extend that.
Very good.
Okay. All right. See you guys on Monday. Hang on. Actually, I'm flying to Norway. Oh yeah, no, I'll be there. I'll be there in time for the call. All right. Have a good week.
I won't be, because I'll be at a virtual conference on legal technology.
Sounds good. Enjoy that. Okay. Bye, guys.
Conference. Lovely weekend.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Take care.